In Calibrations.com version 14.1, we're excited to bring you a new feature. And this allows us to create a centralized location to store your vendors in your system. In the past, where you'd have to go to for your vendors would be in the Add Edit list under Equipment Info, and here are your vendors. Now, unfortunately, vendors are stored under each company. And in order to share this list, you would have to go and either merge or replace this special add edit list into other companies. Now, with this new feature, I want you to pay attention to the very bottom here under system-wide. We now have the option to hit this little globe icon for system-wide vendor options. And we can enable the system-wide vendor setup options. In doing so, vendors will now show at the bottom of this list. Now, unfortunately, what you see here, there are no vendors and no vendor records in this table so far, in this grid. But what we can do is actually click on one of our items. And I'm going to hold down the shift key, and then click on my last vendor here. I can now right-click and copy those selected vendors to my system-wide list. It's going to ask me to confirm. I'm going to hit yes. Now if I go to my vendor list here, the ones that I selected and copied are now showing in my system-wide vendor list options. Now if we go back to the equipment view, the vendors that we're still seeing are only linked to that same company. So we haven't really changed anything yet, right? We've only copied those vendors to the new list. The great thing about this too is if I go back to my add edit list, and if I go to my, for lack of better words, legacy vendors here, any items that are inside of the add edit vendor options in this dialog, any additional information such as billing addresses or shipping addresses, or even contact information. Under this general info tab, we have our details and also custom information. All of that will get brought over. The only thing that won't is your purchase orders. So if you were to have copied this, all of that would have gone down to our new section here. Now that we've got our system-wide vendor list populated, we actually have data in this table here. Let's test it out, and let's try to lock the system down and go into a test mode. This is easily reversible, and please do not be afraid of using this test function, as simply unchecking this option will take you out of testing mode. But what I can do is click on this globe icon again, which is called our system-wide vendor options. And keep in mind, we're in our system-wide tab under vendors. And I'm going to test enforcement of system-wide vendor mode. And in doing so, going back to the equipment tab underneath my drop-down lists, I am only shown my vendors that I put into my system-wide vendor options. Also note that when you go to your user location settings now, and you go down to your default companies, vendors is now system-wide locked down for all users to only use the system-wide vendors list. Now here comes the fun part. If we go to our companies tab, and for instance, if my main company is IndySoft, and I have 3 different branches, let's set my IndySoft Charleston branch, I can now link this vendor to a system-wide added vendor from that list we just populated. So I'm going to link my vendor to this branch. Now I can save my settings here. And I'm going to do that for all 3 of my other branches. Enable branch, choose Columbia, and then click Save. And then last but not least, my Greenville. Notice these items are taken off the list once a linked vendor is added or linked to the branch company itself. And there we go. Now we have successfully linked our system-wide vendors to an actual branch in our company's lists. Now let's talk about users with a branch set in their user location settings. As of right now, I don't have a location set. If I open up user location settings, if I go down to my workstation identifiers and set a branch, let's just make this one Charleston for now. Now my Charleston branch is selected under my user location setting. Nothing really changed. I can still see a full vendor list option here for my system-wide vendors, but you can also set approved vendors for certain companies. I set mine to Charleston, but what if I wanted to make an approved vendor list to where I could only select a select few that will come up for users underneath my same branch? I want to add a Greenville branch here for my approved vendor list. And given that I set my user location settings to use the IndySoft Charleston branch, if I go back to equipment view and go to serviced by, only IndySoft Greenville will show. So the great thing about the approved vendors list is if there is anything existing in this table, then and only then will that be enforced that you are limited to items to be populated from this list. Now, if we removed related or approved vendors from here, we go back to the equipment view, notice all of those vendors will pop up. So this setting is more along the lines of, like I said earlier, if these approved vendors exist under that company in that table, then it will be enforced and you will be locked down to only those items. Now, as a system administrator, I can go to the admin panel and open Profile Manager called Setup System-Wide Vendor Location Preferences. And if we select that, we see our 3 branches that exist in our system-wide vendor options. And the only way these records will show is if a branch is set up and also linked to one of the new system-wide vendor options. Now, while inside of this vendor location preferences dialog box here, we do have the option to add specific users and also their profile type to the users underneath each individual vendor that we set up for our system-wide vendor list. But that's for another video that we'll describe. So keep in mind, all of these changes that we've made are easily reversible, and there are no consequences of setting up these system-wide vendor options without making too many changes. It's easily reversible. In the event that we want to enforce the system-wide vendor options that we just input here, we can go up to the globe here underneath the vendor's system-wide option, and we can enforce system-wide vendor mode to where now vendors from the equipment info section has disappeared. And now we're only left with the system-wide vendor options. But please don't worry, this is easily reversible. All you'd have to do is go back up to the very top and uncheck enforce system-wide vendor options, where your equipment info vendors add edit list item will appear, and you will also still have your vendors list here. You do have the ability to uncheck test vendor system-wide options if you'd like, but keep in mind, like I said, this is all reversible. You can easily re-enable these for testing at a later date. But in conclusion, this is how you get your company-wide vendors over to your system-wide vendors list. Thank you.